Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. We come now to question 64 in our ongoing study on the Westminster Shorter Catechism. If you were with us last week, you remember that we segued finally on to the fifth commandment, and that question 63 simply asked, what is the fifth commandment? Well, now we begin to break it down a bit. Question 64 asks, what is required in the fifth commandment? The answer given is the fifth commandment requires the preserving the honor and performing the duties belonging to everyone in their several places and relations as superiors, inferiors, and equals. That's a little bit of a mouthful, so let me repeat it again. The fifth commandment requires the preserving the honor and performing the duties belonging to everyone in their several places and relations as superiors, inferiors, or equals. Well, probably the thing that jumps out at you here is this language of superiors and inferiors. We live in an egalitarian age, a nation founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and so this language is puzzling to us. But I would remind you once again that this language is perfectly appropriate and fitting, because when we're speaking of superiors and inferiors and equals, we're not talking about value or dignity or anything sort of measurable one person to another. Instead, we're talking about roles. We're talking about roles. There may be a pastor out there who is less effective as a pastor than I might be. I know it's hard to imagine, but imagine there is one. There's a pastor out there, but he's 30 years older than me, and he's been at this all this time. That guy's going to be served to me. In fact, in the Presbyterian Church, when you stand up to speak at presbytery, a gathering of the pastors and the ruling elders from a particular geographic region and a particular denomination, when you stand up to speak, you say fathers and brothers. Fathers and brothers. Everyone has an equal vote at presbytery, but we acknowledge that those who are more experienced are more like fathers, and those who are more like peers are more like brothers. Well, the fifth commandment is asking us to recognize that. I remember my father explaining to me, probably because I had been disrespectful to a teacher, that this command not only, the fifth commandment, as with all of them, not only has a broader understanding in terms of the duties, but it also has a broader understanding in terms of the object. That is, we not only have to honor, we have to perform the duties. But for whom? Not just our mother and our father, but all those, especially in terms of honor, those who are in authority over us. If you're in the military, you salute your superior officer. Doesn't mean he's more important than you, more valuable than you, or a better soldier than you. You salute him because he is a superior officer. When you're in school, you're supposed to treat your teacher with respect and dignity, not just because he's your equal as a human being, but because he sits or she sits in a position of authority in that classroom. So that's one of the reasons that this goes beyond simply mother and father. I'm going to suggest as well that it goes to our civil rulers as well. Every year, especially when we're end up with people in positions of leadership that are a little bit harder for Christians to embrace, I always try to find a way to remind people that it's not fitting for a Christian, as much as they may stand opposed to the policies or even the person who sits in the office of the president, to mock their work in that office. People used to think it was really clever to refer to President Obama as President Obummer, or some connection of his middle name and Muslims, etc. I don't have a position on whether or not he's a Muslim. I certainly have a position about whether or not he was a good president. I don't believe he was at all, not in the least. But he was the president of the United States. Even Paul, when he says something harsh to the chief priest, gets a slap across the face, gets rebuked, and he doesn't stand up and say, "Hey, I'm a man as much as you are." He apologizes. He didn't know he was the chief priest. So, we're supposed to treat those in authority over us with respect. We're supposed to treat those who are in authority under us with grace and kindness and gentleness. We're supposed to treat our equals as equals. This is what's required of us. Now, I'm perfectly willing to admit that there are different ways that different cultures handle social levels. One of the things that we're used to is the great drama in cultures that have strict lines of strata of culture that you can't cross. And then we find the wealthy prince falls in love with the peasant woman, or the other way around. The queen falls in love with the gardener, and there's all this scandal and drama about that. And that's not where we are in our culture. But that doesn't change our duty with respect to this command. We'll look more at it next time as we consider what is forbidden in the fifth commandment. I promised that I would give updates from time to time on the progress being made as we seek to start Sovereign Grace Fellowship, a new church here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And since we last spoke about this, we had our second worship service. And I think I confessed earlier that it's really the second one that makes you nervous, because on the first one, it's not at all unusual for friends and well-wishers who care about you, but who are, for very good reasons, already committed to the church they're attending, to take a Sunday and come worship on the inaugural Sunday of this new plant. And then it's the next Sunday that all of a sudden you have your first radical drop in attendance, and the devil's right there to discourage you. Well, we did have a drop in attendance, as we expected. It wasn't that radical, and by God's grace, we were not in the least discouraged. Instead, it was another Sunday of great blessing, of worship that was encouraging and strengthening and uplifting and unifying, and also preaching from God's Word. We have started a new series built around the new church in Jerusalem. In Acts chapter 2, after the 3,000 are brought in after Peter's sermon at Pentecost, we're told about how those who came in devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. That's what I preached on the previous Sunday. And this Sunday I'll be preaching on they devoted themselves to fellowship, and we're going to be looking at the breaking of bread and prayers in future weeks as well. So we had a sermon built on this premise, and it was a blessed opportunity to remind everyone of the grace of God and the work of Christ on our behalf. We were able, as always, to celebrate the Lord's Supper and to visit for a while. Now, that said, this is after I record, but before you hear, we'll be having our third service, and we're going to, for the first time, share a meal together after worship. So we're excited about that coming as well. But, one of the things that happened on this second week that really blessed me was that after the service, there was a fellow there who we'd never met, never heard of, didn't know anything about him. He had contacted us maybe the night before on Saturday and asked, a question or two, and he came and worshiped with us. And I just had the opportunity to visit with him afterwards. We talked for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and it was a really helpful, fruitful conversation, I hope, for both of us. There was a lot of openness, a lot of communication of some hardships, of some failures, and a shared rejoicing in the provision of Christ for us. And it was one of those moments where you think, now this is precisely what I've prayed for. I have prayed, Lord, give us opportunity to serve your saints in a way that won't bring any glory to us. This was not one of those celebratory occasions where, we had our 1000th baptism, or we completed our massive building project, or, we planted our 20th church. This was just a conversation with a saint. Nothing complicated about it at all. Nothing exciting in one sense about it, but conversation where we're building each other up, we're encouraging each other, we're speaking God's word into each other's lives. I know my wife, has conversations like this all the time. She's gifted at this. I'm learning this. But what I learned was this was really refreshing. This was really encouraging to me, and I pray to the gentleman that I spoke with as well. So we had that, and coming up in a few days, we have our first shared meal. Our worship leaders are not going to be able to be with us, so we're going to have a little bit of a challenge on that end, trying to figure out how to lead worship. But so far, the congregation has sung out boldly. I've got my sermon all prepared and ready to go. We're looking forward to it. We would love, if you're nearby, we would love to have you come and visit. We're not a high-pressure closing church. We will visit with you, engage with you, try to get to know you. But we recognize the universality of the church, and there's lots of good churches around. But if you'd love to come visit, we'd love to have you come visit. If you are not close and you want to visit online, you can do that. Or we put it that we start at 11 o'clock, but I don't want you missing regular church. Be there with God's people, or you can watch later. We are, as always, looking for people who will be praying for us. We're very, very conscious of the reality of the work of the devil in fighting against the work of the church. The devil in the Garden of Eden went after the bride of Adam. The devil in our day goes after the bride of the second Adam, which is the church. Would you pray for protection for us against the wiles of the serpent? Would you pray that we would not succumb to discouragement? Would you pray that the gospel would be faithfully preached? And as always, we're also looking for those who are in a position, who are excited about what we're doing and planning, who want to come alongside us and support us financially. We would dearly love that, value that, put that to good use. You can do it by giving to Dunamis Fellowship. The church is under that umbrella, and that's as easy as pie. You just go to rcsproulJR.com. There's a donate button right there. It goes to Dunamis Fellowship. I'm not sure that we'll be doing weekly updates on church moving forward, but we will come back and keep you up to date from time to time. Thank you again for listening. This is now my third attempt to record this segment, which causes me to wonder if maybe there's some reason I'm not supposed to do it. But I'm going to press forward anyhow. This particular segment is a part of our ongoing series that we call Forever Friends. But this one is a little bit unusual compared to the others. As with the others, I'm happy to look back to this friend and some wonderful shared moments that we had together. But there's a dark side to this as well. You know, one of the things that makes a friend stand out in your history is if that particular friend was there with you in the context of new experiences. And that's certainly the case with this particular friend. It was with him that I first had cold soup. I think it was vichyssoise. I had staying over at his house, and I just couldn't believe that anybody would eat cold soup. It was with this friend that I was on a skateboard for the very first time. It was with this friend that I was on a trampoline for the very first time. It wasn't his trampoline, but he had a friend that lived up the street and took me up there, and we jumped on that trampoline. This particular friend lived in a development addition outside the town of Ligonier, very middle class. And, you know, he was just a fitting friend. The first time I ever went on a long hike in the woods, I went with him. His mom was friends with our fourth grade teacher and took us up into the mountains, and we hiked along for a while. One other thing, first, with respect to this friend, is that my very first date was with his sister when I took her to the school's annual picnic at the end of the school year. It wasn't the last time, though, that I had a friend whose sister was my girlfriend. But the thing that really sticks out is this difficult thing. I'm not sure if I was in early junior high or middle school or late elementary school, somewhere in that range, and I was spending the night with my friend, which I'd done many times before, and he'd spent the night at my house. And this particular night, we had bedded down in his sister's room because she had two beds, and it was late, and we were worn out from a long day of playing, and just about to fall asleep when all of a sudden there was a very quiet tapping on the door. And I heard a voice, not real strong and not real clear, saying the name of the older sister whose room we were in. My friend whispered to me, "Don't say anything." There was another knock. The daughter's name was said again. I'm holding my breath. I'm terrified. I have no idea what in the world's going on. I don't even know why I'm afraid. But eventually I can hear whoever it was walking away. It was then that my friend said to me, "My dad is an alcoholic." Now, I don't know that I'd ever heard that word before, and I'm quite sure I didn't know precisely what it meant, but I was able, based on the context, to figure out pretty much what it meant. In fact, I sort of ran through some other anomalies in the history of my relationship. His mother was the tiredest-looking woman I'd ever seen, and that certainly fit with the idea of an alcoholic. And there was another time when the two of us had run into his dad in town, and his dad had just seemed very, very odd and strange. I don't know that we talked any more about it. but I remember carrying that secret with me, and that secret cultivating in me a great deal of concern and compassion for my friend. It took me several years to figure out that my, by this time, former girlfriend was also due a lot of compassion, as I thought, well, not only is her dad an alcoholic, but what in the world's he doing knocking on her door late at night? I don't know the end of this story. The last time I spoke with my friend was probably 35 years ago. We hadn't seen each other at that point in 5 years probably. And I certainly haven't heard anything since. But I have thought about him. And I've thought about that night. And I thought about how difficult it must have been for him. You know, he, like, I guess all friends, he had some annoying habits. I'm sure I had habits that annoyed him as well. But that reality, that hardship, cultivated in me a level of compassion. I pray that his life has turned out well. I pray that God has blessed him. I pray that God's rescued him. I know that that can be something that runs in families. But I like to think he's doing well, in part because he seemed to manage that hardship pretty well while we were growing up. He was strong, even in the midst of that hardship. Well, I don't think I can probably track him down on the internet, though I may try. I'm certainly not going to share his name and ask for your help. But if somehow he gets this, hears this, I hope that he knows that I remember him well. I think well of him. I pray for him. And let me once again remind you, look back on your childhood. Now, from the adult's perspective, you may understand things you didn't understand then, and which may give you a deeper sense of compassion. Reach out to those old friends and let them know that you're thinking about them and that you're grateful for them.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.